All right, hello. Welcome back. Chase Thomas Podcast, taping this on a Thursday afternoon. First timer on the program. He's had a couple days to reflect, to feel better, to move forward. Something that I'm very much familiar with, being a Tennessee and Atlanta sports fan. It's something I've gotten used to over the years. And Alex, you had the unfortunate meme that came out following the Chargers' blown 27-0 lead, where my Atlanta Falcons got blended with the Los Angeles Chargers logo because of said comeback, because there was a certain 28-3 comeback for the Falcons a couple years ago in the Super Bowl. We don't have to discuss that. How are you? How are you dealing with everything that it's been a couple days?
Yeah, it is absolutely not the end to the season that we expected. It would have been one thing to lose the Jags game. I did kind of predict them to lose to the Jags. I certainly did not predict them to lose to the Jags in that way, which is you have a 27-0 lead, and then articles are coming out days later debating whether 28-3 was worse or whether 27-0 was worse. Uncertainty about Brandon Staley's position with the franchise, and then, press conference yesterday, firing an offensive coordinator. So it has been a wild 4 days, I guess, ever since the loss. But, a lot of change coming in Chargerland, at least at the moment. And, I'm doing better than I was on Saturday, and we did a live stream right after the show. But, obviously still a lot to process.
Now that you've had a couple days to process, who would you say is most to blame for what happened in Jacksonville in the second half?
I think if you're looking at it, it's the coaching staff in particular. I think you go with Joe Lombardi, right? The Chargers got 5 interceptions. That should have been kind of enough to seal the deal. They won. They're the first team to have 5 turnovers, I believe, and lose in the playoffs, or win the turnover differential by 5. The Chargers didn't convert really, even on some of the opportunities they got in the first half. They were putting field goals up instead of touchdowns on short fields. And then, of course, putting up 3 points in the second half. Only being able to muster, they couldn't muster up any running game to be able to run out the clock on the Jaguars and string drives together. And that's been the story for the Chargers offense, I think, for a lot of this year, because, from the outside national media perspective, you have Justin Herbert and you have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams and Austin Eckler. And it's like, this should work a lot easier than it is, right? But the offense has just been rough this year, right? It has been tough to sustain drives. And the offense has kind of been like pulling teeth. And I think Joe Lombardi and a lot of the type formations that he calls and, the inability to divert from that at times has gotten him in trouble this year. And obviously you look at Brandon Staley. It's the defense did as well as it could have in the first half, but then Michael Davis got hurt. And the Chargers didn't really have any adjustments for Doug Peterson in the second half. And Doug Peterson took that defense to task and scored, basically almost 31 completely unanswered, which is kind of unheard of in a playoff game. So, for me, it's the coaching staff, and, there's even coaching staff decisions prior to this game, like Mike Williams' availability in Week 18 that we could get into. For me, this loss largely falls on the coaching staff as opposed to, the players.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember the Falcons-Chargers game, which was one of the more absurd games I've watched in recent Falcons memory that I'm sure you very much enjoyed. Like, there was the Austin Eckler rollover touchdown that wasn't, where I was like, that's the most Falcons thing that's ever happened. They didn't follow through on the tackle and he popped up. But you watch that offense and you said it's like pulling teeth, and that was something that I had just jotted down when I'm watching that game, is just that Herbert's making all the throws. You see it with Herbert, but there's no explosion to this offense. The Falcons weren't terrified of Justin Herbert eviscerating this poor secondary. We had Armstrong and some weak corners in that game, and y'all were beat up too, I seem to recall. But you had Gerald Everett, you had Austin Eckler out of the flat, you had Josh Palmer. I think Carter was a big target in that one, if I seem to recall a lot of over-the-middle stuff with him. But it never felt like this terrifying flamethrower offense that we've come to know with all the other elite quarterbacks, right? Like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. Like there's just fear with opposing defenses when you're going up against them. And the Chargers, it never really felt like that with Justin Herbert. And it wasn't a Herbert issue. It was just more of like, it just doesn't feel like a lot of defensive coordinators are losing sleep over what Lombardi was going to bring to them, right?
Absolutely. And I think you contrast that to what the Chargers were prior to Lombardi getting there in Herbert's rookie year in 2020. You have Shane Steichen, who was the offensive coordinator then, and there were a lot of these like deep touchdown passes to Mike Williams. At the time, Jalen Guyton, Tyron Johnson was on the team then. And it felt like a very track meet offense, right? Now, the defense was the problem then, and that's why they ended up hiring Brandon Staley in 2021 to fix the defense. But the offense has also regressed since then, and that's been the issue. And when you have a quarterback like Herbert, and you have to go up against Allen and Mahomes and Joe Burrow and all these quarterbacks in the AFC, and there's just no margin for error, it's just really hard to win games having this close to the line of scrimmage, Herbert's average depth of target being like as small as it is for as powerful an arm as he has. It's really hard to run the offense that way, and I think more so than anything, it's kind of inexplicable why the offense has been run this way the last 2 years. And they posted winning records because the team is, really talented, right? They go 9-8, and then they go 10-7 this year. And maybe if they win that Jaguars game, I don't know if Joe Lombardi would have still been employed by the team. Who knows? That's kind of alternate history. But, I do think that you could just watch that Jaguars game, and anyone who watched that game as a national TV game, you could just see that like this offense was not utilizing Herbert and everything they had in the ways that they could. Right, and I think that is kind of the storyline of the Chargers, like you said, in the last 2 years, and like you saw in the Falcons game.
Yeah, and at the same time, now that we've seen both sides of this, and like you said, Shane Steichen, obviously a great OC and great mind, you're not gonna be able to pull him in. But I am curious, like you mentioned, casting a wide net on Twitter, and I'm curious, like who do you think? Who is your hope? Let's do this. Who is your hope for the next offensive coordinator for the Chargers, and who's your gut telling you Brandon Staley is going to really pursue and go with?
Hard to tell who he's really going to pursue and go with, just because Staley hasn't really like narrowed down candidates. Like he hasn't been like, oh, you have to have a certain amount of experience.
He's just surprised he still has his job.
Probably there might be a little bit surprised.
You know, Sean Payton's out there. He would take this job. I mean, if y'all want to keep me around, I guess I'll stay. But I mean,
unfortunately, I think I hope Sean Payton doesn't wind up in Denver as a Chargers fan. That's one of my big fears, certainly there. But yeah, for me, if you're talking about who I think Staley's going to hire, and he was asked this by Daniel Popper at the press conference yesterday, Staley has wanted to implement a Shanahan-based kind of West Coast offense with the Chargers and Justin Herbert, and that was sort of his hope for Joe Lombardi. It never really like amounted to what Staley's expectations were. So I think you could go with a lot of offensive assistants who want to run that scheme, and so that doesn't really like narrow it down because I think the league is trending in that direction more so anyway. But for me, if you're talking about my dream as an offensive coordinator, and it's going to be incumbent on him not getting the Cardinals job or the Panthers job that he's interviewing for as the head coach, but it's Frank Reich, who was formerly the offensive coordinator of the Chargers back in the day, back in the San Diego days. But he's really grown and developed a lot as an offensive coordinator and a play caller since then. Obviously, people remember him with the Philadelphia Eagles in the Super Bowl, posted a winning record in Indianapolis in 5 seasons despite what he was given, on offense and at quarterback. I just think he is the guy that can take Herbert to this next level. Everyone saw that what he's done with Foles and Wentz in Philadelphia, what he did with Wentz in Indianapolis, kind of rebuilding his career, what he did with a late-stage Phillip Rivers, who, as Chargers fans watched in 2019, for our team, he looked cooked, right? And, then the Colts turn around and make the playoffs and make this kind of good run with him. And obviously, got the best out of Andrew Luck and Jacoby Brissett as well. So Frank Reich is very much a quarterback whisperer. He is a veteran play caller. And the Chargers firing Joe Lombardi in this circumstance, I don't know if there's a better offensive coordinator you could possibly fall into than Frank Reich, who just happens to be available because the Colts went with Jeff Saturday as their head coach to finish the season and scapegoated Frank Reich. So for me, he would be the optimal offensive coordinator hire.
I think it's going to be Scott Turner because everything has to just time is a flat circle, and we just need to continue on the Turner legacy in Charger land. So he is now open for a position, and I think that's what you do. You just you run it back, and Scott Turner can eventually take over from interim once Brandon Staley's fired, and then I'm sorry, that's all very mean, but. Is there at least a part of you that's like, oh my God, it might be Scott Turner?
Yeah, I hope that doesn't happen with Scott Turner. Washington was pretty rough to watch this year as a whole. But yeah, I don't know if it's going to be Scott Turner, although I would be very dismayed if it was. But yeah, I just hope that 27-0 turns into a positive change at offensive coordinator. Whomever it is. But yeah, I think there's a couple guys that, that are hot head coaching candidate or offense coordinator candidates right now. Chargers could like after. If you're looking for another quarterback whisperer, you have Brian Johnson in Philadelphia, who's going to get some offensive coordinator looks after what he's done with Dak Prescott and Kyle Trask and Jalen Hurts. Has also called plays before. You can look at Joe Brady, who I think is also going to get some looks as well as the Bills quarterback coach. And, you can kind of, I think everyone sort of has the same 4 or 5 names, like more or less, that are like really hot offensive coordinator candidates this cycle. But all these same guys sort of run, similar West Coast offense schemes. And, if you're looking to maximize Herbert, you want that kind of quarterback whisperer guy to do it.
Interesting. Biggest offseason question facing the Chargers is what?
Yeah, I mean, who they hire at offensive coordinator is absolutely the biggest question because Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco cannot afford to have this offense be what it was this year, right? Because you're just kind of asking potentially for another wild card elimination. You're asking, and they have a harder schedule next year too. The Chargers, I believe they face a bunch of like 10-win playoff teams next year. You got the Cowboys coming. Of course, they're still in the AFC West. You got the Chiefs twice a year. You got the Broncos, who are probably going to be better depending on the head coach that they hire, right? Brady might go to Vegas, right? So who knows what that's going to be. But I think the Chargers are going to have really difficult schedule going forward, partially because of their second place finish within the division. And so for me, I just think you have to have this offense, be capable of consistently putting up more than 27, points per game. Like you just have to have them as a top 5 offense in the league. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And I think the pressing issue is just Staley's leadership as a whole, right? Yeah, Staley said in his press conference yesterday he's going to be the defensive coordinator going forward as the play caller, right? So I think a lot of people thought, oh, maybe there'll be a change there, and they get another, defensive coordinator and just kind of allow Staley to be like a CEO, head coach type of deal. But he's going to call the plays, and this defense, in 2 years, they were 20th in the NFL this year. And Staley kind of defended that in his press conference yesterday, saying they were, 6th in the NFL. If you look over the last month, or they were the number 1 defense in the last month specifically. So that's sort of like how he defended it. But at the same time, for the whole year, you're ranked 20th. And they did deal with a lot of injuries. They dealt with a lot of attrition. But, that's not necessarily going to be something that's an excuse from year to year, especially when the Chargers were actually really healthy if you look at 2021, and then they experienced kind of bad injury luck this year. But yeah, for me, those are the 2 main questions, are just how do you kind of revamp this offense and defense for this team to get them to the next level while also having limited resources, because they don't really have the cap space that they did last year when they traded for Khalil Mack and signed J.C. Jackson and made all these, big power play moves.
Do you think this roster was good enough to win the title as currently constructed going into the playoffs?
I think anytime you have Justin Herbert on your roster, you are good enough to win a title, right? And I mean, this is such a quarterback-heavy league. And, they were supposed to get Rashawn Slater back against the Chiefs. If that were to have happened, then obviously you have a really solid offensive line. You obviously have Keenan Allen, you have Mike Williams, you have Austin Eckler. I would say, yes, this is a good enough roster to win an offense if they get some key supplementary players. I think you have to look to get some explosiveness to the offense in the draft. That is going to be, I think, a key, whether that's a wide receiver in round 1 or even boosting the tight end position. But as currently constructed, I think this is a team that can keep up with the Chiefs if they're coached the right way offensively. This is a team that can keep up with Josh Allen and the Bills if they are coached the right way offensively. And you can just see the last 2 years that this offense was, largely misused. So not that they're stacked roster compared to the rest of the AFC or anything, but they're on that level. And I think that it's just about maximizing what you get out of Justin Herbert at this point, which they haven't really done yet.
The biggest name not on this team next year is who?
Ooh, this is an interesting question. I think you could potentially look at Keenan Allen. I think that the Chargers, Daniel Popper of The Athletic had said on a recent podcast that the Chargers didn't really look into trading him next year, but there was some trade buzz in the organization around Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen is heading into effectively what is the last expiring year on his deal. He technically does have a year in 2024, but the Chargers have an out in terms of guaranteed money, so 2023 is effectively the last year on his contract as they built it. He is going to be 32, if I'm correct, next season. And, he had multiple, kind of groin injuries, was in and out of the lineup this year. And so for me, if you're looking at him, I think that he ended up having a pretty good season for what it's worth for the amount of time that he missed. But I wouldn't be surprised just because in a league where you have Jamar Chase and you have Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis in Buffalo, you have Mahomes obviously with the Chiefs. I just think you need a little bit more explosiveness, and Keenan Allen is a mastermind route runner technician in the way that we talk about like Devontae Adams, but he's a little bit older and he doesn't quite have that same burst that he used to in his routes. So if you kind of want to run it back with Mike Williams and maybe speaking of Tennessee, like a Jalen Hyatt kind of player in the draft, then, I think that that's something the Chargers can do. You could also go after Zay Flowers or a number of other receivers. But for me, I wouldn't bet that he's off the roster, but I do think they probably kick the tires on a trade at least.
Jalen's a South Carolina kid. He likes the warm weather. I think he would enjoy being in Los Angeles. That'd be fun. I'd like to see him there. A couple more real quick. Do they need another back to pair with Austin Eckler next year?
Yeah, I mean, what they got out of Joshua Kelly this year was actually pretty good, but it was also hard to tell how much Joshua Kelly did improve because this runs game was so limited, right, at points. You had moments like the Rams game where I thought Austin Eckler and Josh Kelly really played well and, both had really good games, but they were going up against a pretty battered defensive line that game. Whenever they've gone against a pretty good defensive line, especially like Jacksonville in this playoff game, it's just been bad scheming, in my opinion. The Chargers' right side of the offensive line is a lot better than their left side without Rashawn Slater, and the Chargers still decided to run to the left, almost kind of unanimously or they ran up the middle in the Jags game, and so a lot of it is a scheming issue. I think Lombardi just never really figured out how to utilize the run game outside of occasionally a couple Austin Eckler explosions. Or, Austin Eckler in the screen game. But outside of that, he didn't really have a great way of utilizing the running backs in this offense. So kind of hard to tell. Obviously, if you find a free agent running back or maybe even a running back towards, the first 3 rounds of the draft that you really like, then I think they take the chance. But they've also invested some decent capital at running back and just haven't had the results behind Austin Eckler, who ironically kind of went undrafted and is, their best running back. They spent 2 6th-round picks on their current running back roster. A 4th-round pick on Joshua Kelly, a 6th-round pick on Larry Roundtree, and then they spent a 4th round on Isaiah Spiller, who hasn't been able to really crack the lineups this year, right? So they spent 3 day 3 picks on running backs, which is decent enough capital, but just haven't gotten the results from it so far.
Interesting. We all can't be Arthur Smiths out there. We all can't just turn the Ty Algiers into baby.
Man, I wish we had Cordarrelle Patterson. That was like the one player that I wrote about last offseason, and I was like, man, he'd be perfect with the Chargers. And just watching our offense, it's like you just need that kind of explosive player. So I'm very jealous of Cordarrelle Patterson in Atlanta.
Well, I think he's done. I don't think he's coming back. I think this is it for him in Atlanta. So maybe you can get him this offseason. I don't know.
Maybe. Hopefully.
Last thing. Where can Justin Herbert actually get better? We've talked all glowingly about Justin Herbert. He's obviously an elite quarterback, but where can he actually still get better to take that next step and really evolve even more as a top tier quarterback in this league?
I think there's been pretty decent criticisms of Justin Herbert. One is this year, definitely in contrast to 2021, after he sustained the rib injury in week 2. Justin Herbert was very hesitant about using his legs, particularly in, any time he would try to run for a first down. They didn't really design, not that Herbert took design runs like he was Jalen Hurts or something in 2021, but they still really never have accessed that thing. And Herbert is an incredible athlete. He's had big 20-plus yard runs in games in 2021. And we just didn't see that this year as a result of what the offensive line was and as a result of his rib injury he sustained against the Chiefs. I think he became a more hesitant runner, and the Chargers as a coaching staff just wouldn't call it. So, if you can kind of unlock that part of Justin Herbert's game and, not make him a running quarterback, but give him the option that Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes have when plays break down, and those guys are just kind of able to use their legs. Even Joe Burrow, to an extent, does as well. I think that that's part of taking it to the next level on this offense. I would just say the other thing is just sometimes the touch that he puts on passes as well, because sometimes Herbert does do this thing where he sort of treats every ball like he's throwing at 100 miles an hour, which is good on some plays, but then when he sort of does need that touch, even kind of the ball that he missed in the Jaguars game to Keenan Allen, who was wide open in the end zone, and he just sort of sailed it. Sometimes the Chargers, I think the last 2 years, have come close or have been near the top of the league in drops, and part of that has been the wide receiver play, but part of that has also been Herbert kind of throwing these, really fast balls in tight space that, in a sense is good because he's putting it in a place where only the receivers have been getting it, but also it's been hard for receivers to kind of adjust to, the timing and the I guess hardness, if you want to say, of how he throws. So for me, I would just say the touch, depending on the situation, you don't have to throw every ball like it's 100 miles an hour. And so for me, especially as the Chargers kind of improve in the short passing game and the offense isn't as congested next year, I would just like to see him, improve the touch of his passes and get to a level where Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers have been in the league, where they are able to put the ball wherever on the field without necessarily rocketing it in there. And that's still going to be a big part of Justin Herbert's game. It's part of the appeal of his arm, but I would just like to see him have a little bit more touch and decisiveness on his throws sometimes.
Interesting. I'm going to deal with that with Joe Milton this fall here at Tennessee. He has a rocket arm, and he only throws 100 miles an hour, and it's a wild experience when that's what your quarterback's a ball is. Alex, this has been great. I greatly appreciate the time. You can check out your pod, Guilty as Charged, right here on the Blue Wire Pod Network. What can the good folks check out from you and the team this week?
So we're going to be all over the offensive coordinator search as the Chargers start to interview candidates. I think after they eventually hire an offensive coordinator, we might take a week or so break for a while after how strenuous this season has definitely been, covering it day in and day out. But you can check us out there for all your, Chargers content if you want to follow that. We also, talk about sort of the rest of the things that are happening in the NFL around the Chargers as well. So always fun, and we love covering free agency, and we especially love covering the draft and discovering, that's, unfortunately, as the Chargers lose in the playoffs and lose this lead to Jacksonville, that is what the next pivot is watching that draft film and, finding some studs that you like in the draft for the team to potentially draft. But we always love talking about the draft when it comes around. So follow us for all the offseason content, and hopefully the Chargers don't lose 27-0 in the playoffs next year if you follow us for the long term. So can't promise that, but very excited to still cover the team.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time. Enjoy the offseason, enjoy the break, and good luck on the OC search, and we'll have to circle back again soon.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Alex.